Well, all right. Welcome everybody to the August edition of the Kentuckiana FileMaker Developers Group. And this month, we have Kevin Frank joining us. And Kevin Frank is kind of famous for the website FileMaker Hacks and all of the great articles and information that has come out of FileMaker Hacks over the years. And we're really happy to have him join us today. As of late, he has done a number of blog posts and stuff about JSON. And so today, as a preview to some presentations he's going to be giving at the upcoming Full Access Conference in October in California, he's going to preview some of the JSON presentation stuff that he's going to be doing at that conference. And so we're going to get a lot of good JSON information. So with that, Kevin, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, well, I think I'll share my screen then. Sharing not turned on.
I haven't set up the sharing yet. Hold on. Oh, did you get it?
Yeah,
Oh, that's not what I meant to do.
there we go.
Okay, am I sharing? I'm sharing.
Yeah.
All right, well, I said as few slides as possible, but I do have just a few. And welcome. And as you mentioned, Ron, this is a sneak peek preview of what I'll be presenting at Full Access in October. And so one thing I want to point out is we have a resource page for today's presentation. Now, the demo files that I'm going to be showing are not yet on there, but they will be very soon. Possible I'll do a little fine tuning before I post them. But so that resource page, actually, we'll take a look at that in a sec. Yeah, so I'm Kevin Frank. I've got 30 years full-time experience as a FileMaker developer. I've been using it since the 1980s, late 80s, I should say. Technical lead on Codent's Genesis Transactions product. And so, I've got this blog. I've written the majority of the articles. Beverly's my #1 guest author. And I've got a few others out there too. I'm heading for 300 also. I stopped counting. So I've got some goals for today's session. So I'm going to convey depth and breadth of some of what you can do with these custom functions, and particularly JSON query. We're going to talk about other custom functions first, then we're going to come to JSON query. Fast-paced, especially no long-winded code explanations. So we're going to just look at what it can do, but not necessarily how it's doing it. My idea is to plant seeds that move on and take growth later, or maybe get the little wheels turning in heads. All killer, no filler. Disclaimer, so I'm sharing these freely. Use these at your own risk. And let's get started. So what I think is funny is I love it when your words come back to haunt you. So when I wrote my first JSON article, thinking about JSON part 1, so 7.5 years ago, and I said, yeah, there are custom functions out there, but I really like to understand what I'm doing it for. So, and now I use them every day, all day long for JSON. But I do recommend having a thorough grounding, and some of the links on the resource page will be helpful in that regard. So there it is again, and that's what I have to say about that. If I were just to show the resource page. Here we are. So it looks like this, and later this will be on YouTube. I'll put the link to this meeting here, and I'll put demo files here. And then we have lots and lots of links. So it's that. And then, so what I did was I made a sandbox. And the sandbox is called the CF sandbox. Come on, you can do it. I know you can do it. It's going to be patient. Yeah, okay. So, well, the first thing I did was something that's always bugged me about I'll just explain. We have an input, bottom left. We're going to throw some sort of query or syntax at it, and it's going to put the output over here. And if there are any notes I want to share, they'll be here. So one thing that's always bugged me about formatted JSON is the sort of arbitrariness, so it seems, right? There's some algorithm, and when it exceeds a certain length, it goes vertical. So one of the things I love about JSON is it is human readable. A lot of times when I'm looking at JSON, I don't care about so much about individual entries as I do about getting into my head what the overall structure is. So I wrote a custom function, actually co-wrote it with Debbie Fuchs, JSON format 2D. So when we do that, it just takes all the array entries and forces them to be horizontal. Oh, and stop me at any point, or I've asked Ron to step in and let me know if there are questions. I'm not going to see raised hands, so interrupt me anytime with a question. We don't need to wait till the end. Here's another one, and again, this is standard JSON formatting. And so I was like, okay, I see I've got a blueprint and a schedule. It sure would be nice if I could see it like this instead. It's, maybe I'll just make that full screen. Let's make it big, but not that big. And then here's a third one. We got some airports. We've got this thing called organizer. It's got some sub keys within it. And then so if we it's just easier on the eyes. It's easier for me to see what's going on. So if you get deep enough nested, it'll stop working. It's definitely a work in progress. And if anyone chooses to improve it, I'd love it if you'd share your improvements with me. But it's enough to get me through most of what I want it to do. So I have at some point I walked away from it. And then I don't know how many of you are familiar with JSON make array. That's not a custom function. That's a function that was introduced in FileMaker 21 a little over a year ago. And I had already written one called JSON array from list, JSON dot array from list. And one of the ways you can tell my custom functions is they'll have that dot. I mean, other people do this too, but when you see that dot, you know for sure it's a custom function and not a built-in function. So what I did was I'm taking this input here, and notice on the first line we have an object, on the second line we have an array, then we have a 1 plus 1, which I guess we could argue is a text string. We have a number expressed in scientific notation. We have a number, normal number. We have an empty row. We have an address, 123 Main Street. We start 3 lines of an address, and we have a zip code that starts with a 0. So I'm going to click refresh, and what we're seeing at the top is what FileMaker's native JSON make array function does out of the box. What it wants you to do is tell it what kind of array entries what kind of data you're feeding it. But if you leave it blank, that's the same as JSON raw in JSON set element, if you're familiar with that. My advice is use it very carefully. So what's happened here is it's going to try to figure it out for us. And my custom function is also going to try to figure it out for us. So what you can see is it gets the first 2 rows right. It just saw a number there and punted and said, okay, that's a number. So it got that one wrong. It got the scientific notation correct. That is 1,000,000. And by the way, that's reduced, simplified science. Works great in FileMaker. So that's often what I'll reach for these days. Because I can see that immediately and know that's 1,000,000, and that I have to figure out if I'm looking at 100,000 or 1,000,000. It encoded the empty row as quote, quote. It completely botched this because it saw the number and said, oh, that's a number. And here it interpreted that as a number, so it mangled my New Jersey zip code. And this gets it all correct. So, and including the empty row, it's interpreting as a null rather than as a quote, quote. So I'm a big believer in trying to always do proper JSON typing. And that was the goal of what I accomplished there. So on this next one, I just wanted to talk a little bit about number typing and what we can do here. So I set this up and I basically just said, look, here's some JSON where the first entry, the A entry is null and the B entry is 2. And then I loaded them up into 2 variables here, A and B, so I can use them over and over again down here. So lowercase a and lowercase b is just me doing JSON get element on what you have down here. So if I set here I'm using JSON set element, I'm just going to make an array, and I'm just going to tell it it's a string, with the two entries, or I'm going to tell it it's a number with the two entries, or I'm going to tell it it's JSON raw. That's the same as quote, quote, right? It could just as easily put quote, quote there. It'd be the same as JSON raw. And then here, I'm going to use a custom function I wrote called JSON get value type. And its job is to figure out the type of something that isn't JSON with the idea that here's what we would do with it if it were going to go into JSON. Is it JSON? Is it JSON null? Is it JSON string? Is it JSON number, etc. So in this case, I'm saying figure out the type. And what's interesting is all four entries come back different. Right? So if we type it as a string, we get quote, quote, that's what we'd expect, right? And a quoted number. If it's number typed, this is the big bugaboo with quoting numbers. When they're empty, it gives you 0. When you set the type to JSON number, gets the number correct. With raw, it gets the number correct and it interprets the null as a quote, quote. And auto typed with JSON get value type, it gets what we started with. So this would probably be a good time for me to talk a little bit about this function. I don't want to get too deeply into it, but why do we care about auto-detecting the type? Well, one reason is we might be dynamically producing JSON looking at data and want to sort of on the fly encode it correctly. Because it's one thing if we know in advance what we're doing and we can say, well, I know I'm going to be pushing a number into this JSON object, so I'll just use JSON set element and I'll set the type to JSON number. So the purpose of this custom function is to figure it out. And at first I thought it'd be pretty straightforward. Well, it turned out to be really complicated. And I wrote a blog article specifically devoted to this custom function. And the link is here in the demo. But the point being, this is a test suite with 124 cases. And so the idea is if it's working as expected and expected as defined by what I think it should be doing, then put a 1. If it doesn't, put a 0. And if I click find 0, what I want to see is no records found, because that means every record found passed the test. And of course, here in the US, we use a comma as a thousand separator and a dot as a decimal separator, but they do it the reverse in many other places. So I made 2 versions of the file, and again, these will be up on the website. So you can download the version that says decimal comma if you were in some other part of the world and wanted to try it that way. So probably enough to say about, that's probably all I need to say about that, but the point being, this is the engine. I don't like CFs generally that have dependencies on other CFs, but this one is so valuable that I made an exception for that. So I use that a lot. You'll see that even though I won't be talking about it necessarily, that'll be the engine that makes some of these other CFs possible. So here's a kind of interesting one. I don't know if you've ever needed to dedupe an array, but you've got stuff in an array and you want to just remove the dupes. So what it does is it just goes down and it says, I'm not going to change the sort order. I'm just going to go and just keep the first one and ignore any subsequent ones. So these are not in alphabetical order. But maybe I want them in alphabetical order. So I also made a sort array as text, in which case I can alphabetize what's in the array. Normally, the only way we'd want to do that is if we were in charge of the output, because typically arrays are so dependent on position, you'd want to rearrange things in it with extreme caution unless you knew that you were in charge of it. Oh yeah, this one's kind of interesting. This was something that came back from a SQL query and or some test data pretending to be coming back from an SQL query. So it's pipe delimited. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to be able to turn that into JSON. And I thought, I might want to turn it into an object, or I might want to turn it into an array. So what I decided to do was if I leave this thing called optional key list empty, because of course there are no keys here, right? I'm going to have to assign those. If I leave the optional key list empty, then it's going to produce an array. All right. And if let's go to the next example. If I provide the optional key list, then it will make an object. So this is all stuff you could do right with the while function very easily. But if you do it a lot, then it makes sense, I think, sometimes to reach for a custom function instead. Although there's certainly a lot of benefit in writing your own while loops. A lot of educational benefit. So Christos Leonides Chin, brilliant FileMaker developer. And when I showed him this, he said, "Oh, you need to do a map." And I said, "Would you do the map?" He said, "Okay." So this is his custom function. He's still using my JSON get value type inside of it to auto type the output. So what he's doing here is he's saying, this is just building the map using JSON set element, but he's basically saying, this is how I want to treat these values. So, working from left to right, we got the invoice number, then we got a description, et cetera, right? So he wrote it out like this, and notice the dot in the name there. So this is going to be multi-level. And there it is. So, so then I got to thinking about that, and I thought, okay, I wonder if he notice. So we're respecting the dot, and I thought, well, what if they wanted the dot to actually be embedded in the name, and it was one key? It wasn't nested like this. So what if we wrap it? This is called bracket notation. It's well documented, but effectively, you can always use it. There's no harm in using it. It's sort of analogous to putting quotation marks around a field in SQL when you're not sure whether or not it's reserved or otherwise problematical, and you just want to make sure that it's going to work and not cause a problem. So it's sort of like that. You can do this if you want. And I mean, I guess I'm saying there's no harm done, but it's going to change what the output is, right? Because now it's not going to treat the dot as a level delimiter. So there's the difference, right? If I go back and forth. Standard field object. Yeah. So I wanted a way just to make JSON, look at a record and automatically make JSON. And so I was working on a sort of simple sync routine. And so the idea is I've got a parent and it's got some children, trim and miscellaneous, and it's got some images too. And I'm going to, let's take a look at the, let's say the trim table. So there's some entries in the trim table. And I want to make a JSON representation of this. So what I've done is I've got a field called as JSON. And it simply calls this function, standard field object. And so it's basically saying, what do I mean by standard field? It's not a global, it's not a summary, it's not a container, it's not a calculation. It's just a regular field, okay? And then I'm purposely hard coding the name of the table occurrence here, because if I put get layout table name, is that what I want? Yeah. If I put get layout table name, it would seem to work, but then if I do stuff with it from a relational standpoint, it'll break. So that's why I've got these comments here. So what does it look like? It looks like this. Tools, data viewer, watch, as JSON, right? And I could format it, but I want it to be as lean as possible, right? I formatted it in the focus. So it's just automatically figuring that out, right? Not based on any layout, but by the fields that are in the table that are what I call standard. So that's that. But where it gets more interesting is if we go back up here to that's one child, right? That's one child entry. Go back up here on the estimate, right? We've got a miscellaneous entry, a couple trim entries, right? Some images, and then so where it gets interesting is if we look at the definition for as JSON here, and what you can see is I'm grabbing the object, all right, and then I'm using another function called array from related to make an array of objects. So when I say array of objects, I think I'll just jump over here for 1 sec. Come back here. I call this JSON query uses it too, right? But I mean an array of objects. I'm talking about this thing on the left here, right? So this is one record. This is the equivalent of what we saw in trim. So I want to pull back something like this. It looks a lot like a portal, really. And it's all the related trim records for that parent estimate record. And so here, so I'm pulling those three related things. And then I'm making an object that represents not just the parent, but also all its children. So it's a bit like the data API when it returns portal data also. And so the way that looks, let's change that to estimate. Right? Okay, so we've got the estimates fields within an image key with the images down below. And then, oh, this is a good time to talk about a fun Windows bug in the data viewer. Okay, has anyone ever run into this? You see, like, there's more data, but I don't have a scroll bar. The workaround for that is to change the split point here. And once you move the split point, then you get your scroll bar. Yeah, so you can see here's a JSON representation of the record and its children. And this is kind of interesting. Well, like I might want to sorry, let me just pull this open here. This is my winery JSON. So there's a couple things in here that we can do. First off, let's ignore the data. Let's just go script workspace. I'm gonna say demo, give me an array of objects from SQL with a key list. Okay. Well, first let's just look at it. Right. So there it is, right? It's not necessarily reflecting what you're seeing here because I asked for all the entries that are in New Jersey or I think one other state, Pennsylvania, maybe. So maybe, yeah, I mean, I'm not seeing them, but they're there, right? So what's going on? How did I do that? Oh, and then with the key list and oh, is that one 2D formatted? Yeah. Okay, so there I did the format 2D on it. Same result, just formatted differently. So behind the scenes, if we go look at that, we've got there it is, with the key list. And I'm just saying this. So I've written a SQL statement, but I've broken it out into the 4 arguments that this custom function expects. So one thing about this custom function that's a little different than if you write your own FileMaker SQL is you cannot use question mark parameters. You have to hard code things, right? So yeah, so there's no capability of processing that. And the reason why is I can't make that dynamic, but I can make all this dynamic if you, I mean, it'll take whatever you feed it with any number of entries because it's just normal SQL without the question mark parameters. So that's kind of interesting, right? Just that you can write a SQL query and have it come back as JSON. Okay, that's effectively what's happening there. But what's more interesting is this, found set to array of objects or found set to array of arrays. So in that case, I'll just run my little shuffle script. Shuffle found set. Okay, we've got a found set, including, I'll point out, a New Jersey zip code and a Massachusetts zip. So we've got some that start with a 0. Right. And if I go found set to array of objects, it's going to do that. I put a little, this isn't really necessary for an array. I mean, for an array of objects, it'll make more sense when I show an array of arrays. But I have a thing where I generally like to hold back array address 0 so that the first index 1 corresponds to record 1. Index 2 corresponds to record 2. So there's a correspondence between the record number and its index position. So what you can see here is RM Taylor. There it is, right? Time to read. Right. And if you're wondering why these are out of order, that's just what JSON does when you format it. It alphabetizes, and the reason ID is on top is it's capital, right? It's case sensitive. So the uppercase ID, or the uppercase I anyway, is alphabetized ahead of all the lowercase letters. That's why ID is first. So, and then we can also do it with and here it is formatted 2D. And then we can do the same for found set to an array of arrays. And actually, these are also short, but the 2D formatting is the same. So behind the scenes, I'm simply saying in my demo script, I'll just look at the objects. That's pretty simple. right? Just call it. It doesn't take any arguments. It figures it out. I'm moving pretty fast. Are there any questions so far? Comments? Tomatoes? Okay. All right.
Haven't seen any, but I would like to thank Beverly for keeping up. She's throwing links in the chat for that correspond with everything you're talking about, and I appreciate that very much,
Thank
Beverly.
you, Beverly. Okay, merge two objects. We've got object A, object B, right? They both are purportedly around about the country of Kuwait. But some clown decided Kalamazoo was the capital of Kuwait, right? In the first object, but in the second object, they got it right. So when we merge these objects, it's going to combine them, but it will keep the second one. If there's a duplication, it'll overwrite A with what's in B. So now these two objects have been merged. Okay. So,
Hey, Kevin, question.
yes.
How is it you determine which one of those is correct to override the other?
Well, I said there would be a long-winded code explanations. However, since you asked, let's just take a quick look at the custom function. So that's JSON merge objects. All right. Yeah, I've written a few.
Wow.
Okay. So I think what I'm doing, just to, again, to not make this long-winded, I think what I'd say is this is just actually just taking advantage of normal JSON behavior. We've all seen the situation, right, where we create a record via set field, and then later we come back and we can update that record using the same relationship, right, because it's already been created. So now the keys are in place, right? So that sort of magic, wonderful behavior, as long as the relationship is set to allow creation, we can set field to create. And then once we've created, we can do additional set fields to populate other fields in that related record. Similar thing here, right? I built this object, right? I just iterated through and built it. And then, right, because I'm building a new object. So I took this as my input, I iterated through it, built what I could from it. And at that point, it said Kalamazoo as the capital, but it was only this object. Basically, when I was done with A, it was putting it here. So then when I come to B, it says JSON set element capital, right? And it overwrote the Kalamazoo on the second pass there.
So basically, you're saying
An
that
unlimited number of objects. It only takes two.
if I were to express that simply, then the rule is that B, or the greater letter alphabetically, overrides the previous?
Yep.
If there's a conflict?
You will prevail.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Merge arrays. So we can merge to arrays, and if I leave this empty, it just glues them together. If the third argument is an insertion point for array 2. And then if I put a 0 in there, it means prepend it, put it at the beginning. So in this CF, 0 means before the beginning. Okay. So before, right? I'll put them here. Notice that on this one, these arguments are exactly the same as before, but because I set the insertion point as 0, it put B before A. Okay. So this 0 here is an address. It has nothing to do with the zeros in the data here. Right, just to be clear. Oh, swap A and B. Notice in this case, I could get the same effect just by reversing A and B here. So then I could leave this empty. All right. In this case, it was A, B, but put B before. In this case, I just swapped A and B. So, here, let's put B in the middle of A. Okay, so I put it position 2, so it's going to land smack dab between those two zeros. And the only other thing I'll say about it is if you put a negative number, it prepends it back and then pads it out with nulls. So it says you told me you want to go -2 back, so I did it, and then I had to get back to 0 again. I had to put some nulls before I could put A, right? It put B way before A. Right? And then same thing, if I do it with a bigger number, then it's going to pad it out with nulls, right? That's just standard JSON set element behavior in an array. That if you go to some far-flung address, it has to pad it out with nulls, right? Because in arrays, everything's position-based. So, and then The final thing I did here was I'm saying dynamically calculate the length of A and then put it 2 points beyond. So I have JSON array length, just figures out what's already there, adds 2 to it. So then I'm putting that X there. It's doing the same thing. Right? If I set that to 1,000 to 100,000, was that, yeah. It's quite happy to do it. And down at the bottom we would find the 99. So yeah, I'll talk about this. Okay. So there's a kind of interesting phenomenon with if you're pushing data into JSON. And I want to check my notes on this because there's a couple of things I want to say about this. Okay. So if I say put this text string here at this position, it's quite happy to do it. This is JSON set element. Okay. It's not having any problem with that. If I instead had a text string there, it still wouldn't. This is live calculating, so it's updating that, and I can prove that by putting the let's put that at 0. So you have to replace the A, right? Because A is at index 0. So where this gets interesting though is let's say I want to put let's go back here. So now we're here. Well, let's say that I want to put the Z inside an array. So I'm going to create a 2-dimensional array. I'm going to create a little array that's going to go inside the big array. I'm saying don't, in fact, here, let's start with a 0. So all of a sudden, FileMaker's JSON set element chokes. Now, if I instead set that to null, then it'll do it. Okay? So it doesn't like overwriting one JSON type with a multi-dimensional array if it's auto-created. And let's just set that to 3. Okay. So this is the kind of stuff that seems kind of weird if you're not comfortable with JSON, but totally makes sense once you've played around with it, right? Is that I'm saying take this Z and push it into this address within this array in the source, right? So it'll, when you auto-create a multi-dimensional array, or when you auto-create an array or an object, it does not want to overwrite if there's already something there. And I thought, yeah, I don't like that. So that's what it won't do. So I made JSON update. So JSON update will still do it. So if I'm going to run into that situation, I can push what I want, where I want, without having to worry about that particular problem. There's some argument about whether that's actually a bug, because somebody was saying, no, you're trying to push something multidimensional into something. And by what do I mean by multidimensional? I mean, right, I can do whatever I want inside of here, right? So, right, I've created this multidimensional monstrosity in there. So I wrote this so I could do that and not have to worry about it. And I mean, I must have blundered into that by mistake at some point. So then there's another trick that this custom function has. I also have JSON insert, and it's hard to believe, but FileMaker doesn't give us a way to push an entry into an array and just shove everything over. It seems like a really huge omission. So I decided to write one that would do it. So what I'm saying here is I want to push my Z at position 2, which is where the C currently is, and shove everything over. So, and of course, not have it break if I'm pushing an array rather than an object, or rather than a text string or a number. So it's just something, it's out of left field. If you need it, it's there. After I wrote it, I didn't end up using it very much, but I still thought it was interesting and I learned some things. So that's what that does. JSON is valid, right? So it's easy enough to check for validity, right? Let me see if yeah. Okay, so JSON is valid. It just says, is this thing an object or an array? and it returns a 1 if it is, right? If I want to botch this, like change that to a semicolon, that's no longer valid JSON. So if I refresh, it's going to say 0. So, and right, I could just as easily have said JSON, let me comment that out, right? I could have just as easily said get JSON element type right? That would do the same thing, right? But I just wrote that as a time saver. So a lot of times I'm like, is this valid JSON? I'm about to work with it. Is it valid? Right? So that's just a time saver. And there was a kind of place where I ended up eating my own dog food. Because one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to make sure that if I had an example in here and I chose to format it, that I wouldn't clobber it, right? So so let's say that because I do this sometimes. I type a semicolon when I meant to type a colon, or I type a semicolon when I meant to type a comma, right? And if it's busy big JSON, I might not notice, right? So now I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say format it, right? Let's say original pessimistic, unformat input optimistic. So you can forget you, buddy. That wasn't valid JSON. Here, I just killed your JSON, right? So what I did instead was I wanted to say the pessimistic version, right? Oh, that was valid. So let me invalidate it again. Okay, now it's invalid, and so if I went to unformat it, the original pessimistic version, okay. So I was thinking, okay, what's this original pessimistic version? I was checking out JSON element type with just what I wrote before, right? And I was testing it and I was saying, and I thought, wait a minute, this is about JSON custom functions. And I wrote a JSON custom function to handle it. So instead I made the new unformat pessimistic, where it just checks if it's valid. So it's only going to touch it if it's valid. And it's not going to touch, otherwise I'll just say, hey, I'm not going to screw your data up. I'm just going to tell you I can't do anything with it. And same for formatting. All right, so if I come over here and I say script format input, oh, I still didn't fix it. Okay. Put that back, make that valid JSON. Now I can format it. Pessimistic means, right, I'm being skeptical, and unformat it. All right. And really, the simplest custom function I ever wrote was the unformatter, which I call JSON deflate. It literally does the same thing as JSON get. It literally does the same thing as this. Sorry, for those of you who already know this trick, it must be really agonizing to watch me fumble around like this. Okay. To comment that other line out first. Yeah. So if you ever want to deflate formatted JSON, just say JSON get element, quote, quote. That means everything, and it'll just really strip out the formatting. So, but I ended up writing JSON deflate just because it's faster under my fingers and it doesn't take any argument. It says, I'm going to assume you've passed me the JSON you want me to deflate. So there. Refresh. Yeah, there it goes. Hey, we're banging through these. Well, this is kind of interesting. So I have an array with 4 entries in it, 5 entries, excuse me. Text string, a quote, quote, so that's an empty text string. A null, banana is another text, right? So it's either all text strings or nulls, and one of the text strings is empty, right? And so I did one called JSON list all values, because sometimes we care about where those gaps are and we don't want to lose them. Whereas JSON list values, well, let's see what happens, right? Do we want to mind or close the gap, right? Sometimes one is preferable and sometimes the other is. Sometimes we have a list of keys and we have a list of values and we want to have a one-to-one correspondence between the position of those two lists, the entries in those two lists. So JSON list all values. Notice it maintained every gap. JSON list values, why did it do this? Does anyone know why it did this? It didn't close it all up, right? But it partly closed it up. Anyone gonna volunteer? Because it's respecting it's counted the quote, but JSON list values ignores nulls, but it does. But if you've got an empty string instead of a null, it will include it. That's why it's there. Let's see. Oh yeah, this is a weird one. And Beverly, I think you may have inspired this, or you may have inspired Steve Sevterera in JSON Query to include something similar. The idea is I want to know if a key exists, right? And so I might say, well, if I want to find out if the key exists, I'll just see if there's a value, right? So I'm going to say JSON get element on my last name, right? Notice most of this is commented out right now. This is the only thing that's active, okay? And I'm going to say, hey, well, I reached in there and I got a value back. I guess last name does exist, right? But what happens if I have that or that, right? Now that's still valid JSON, right? But my trick isn't going to work to find out if that key exists, right? So one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to have a way to just find out whether a key exists, right? Without having to list the keys and do a pattern count, or probably better would be a filter values to do that. In fact, that may be what I'm doing behind the scenes. I'm not sure, but can't remember now. But the point is, key exists, and it doesn't care if the value is empty. So it's going to say, well, yes, that key exists.
Yeah, that's
Sometimes
the
that's useful.
hardest one to work with when you do the list keys and or the list values.
Wait, Beverly, are you talking? I can't hear you at all.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah,
Is-
Beverly, your volume is very low. I'm not sure why, but can barely hear you.
Oh, okay. Let me up it a little bit. The hardest part of working with JSON.
But if you want to post it to chat, someone else could read it.
Okay.
Okay, because right, you're almost inaudible, but thank goodness not
Yeah.
completely. Okay, so yeah. Right, and then anyway, it sometimes comes in handy. Then also, counting keys can get really strange. All right, so you'd think, hey, how hard could it be to count the keys? Right, just do the value count on JSON list keys, right? Right, that's what I'm doing here. So I've got a custom function first counting the keys. Then I've got the more standard approach of value count JSON list keys, right? And so here in example one, I think an awful lot of us have used this trick if we work at all with JSON in FileMaker. But where it gets tricky is keys can have embedded returns and keys can have embedded new lines, right? So now all of a sudden, the value count trick isn't working. Now, I agree it's weird to do that, but sometimes you get weird JSON. And don't forget, you may be dynamically producing the JSON, so you don't really have control over the key names. So anyway, that's why I wrote that, to correctly count the keys when there might be weird things going on with the keys. And we're
Beverly posted in chat that, by the way, JSON format elements is purely a carbon-based convenience. The rest of the functions do not need it, and in fact may cause a memory refresh. And I dare say it also sometimes can cause problems because I believe JSON format elements automatically alphabetizes. Is that correct?
Yeah, but all the JSON functions do. It's pretty rare the JSON spec, it is true, but all the JSON functions alphabetize. So
And that can be a problem. I know I ran into that with working with an API for authorized.net because authorized.net required
Yep.
him to be in a specific order, which was not alphabetized. And
Right. Yes, it's funny because authorized.net is the example that is frequently cited for why it's a pain. According to JSON spec, and you can go to json.org and see it. The JSON spec says that the order of entries within an object is irrelevant and should not matter because you're going to target things by name. So all I can say to that is you're going to have to come up with some sort of clever trick. I have blogged about that before, one workaround.
I've seen somewhere where somebody had done a set of custom functions for specifying the order, which
Mhm.
actually seemed very convoluted. I ended up, in that particular case, I ended up just basically creating the JSON as text and not using any of the JSON functions in order. But the other thing I wanted to add is in reading up on authorized.net, it really has something to do with the authorized.net JSON is not real JSON, so to speak.
That's true.
So that's kind of where the problem comes into play is that the JSON that authorized.net is expecting and using is not standard JSON. So,
Right. Right. Completely agree. So the thing to understand is once you get into rolling your own JSON, then you're pretty much going to have to never transform that JSON with any FileMaker function, right?
yep.
Because if you ever push a single entry into a JSON set element, it's going to re-alphabetize it.
Yeah.
And again, it's case sensitive alphabetization, so that can be confusing, right? Like my ID was at the top when I did that earlier function that I showed because the ID was capitalized, but all my other field names were lowercase. So it alphabetized, right, preferring uppercase to lowercase.
Another
Okay,
comment from Beverly, she said JSON list values can provide deceptive list of values based on null value, legal but not listed with this function.
right, and I showed that a couple examples ago, right,
Okay.
where I listed the values, right? So since it's right here on the screen, let's just do it with the data viewer instead, right? I come over here and I say JSON list values on my input, right? See that? It thinks there's 3 values there because there's a return inside banana. Let me get off this example here. Right. How did I end up with 2 of these? All right. I don't want to know. I don't even want to know. All right. So, right. See that? So that's perfectly legit to insert a return into a value, but JSON list values. Oh, that was clever. Okay. So I'm gonna close that and reopen it. Hey, it wouldn't be a presentation if you didn't have at least one technical glitch, right? There's a tradition to maintain here. I think I made it to 28 or 29 in my 30 examples. So let's just be patient and thank you. I'd much rather be at record 1 than record 0. Okay, so yeah, so that's at any rate. Here we are here, right? And so if with my count elements, I get it right. Right. So although I will say this, right, I'm not counting empties, right? But I am at least counting the legitimate elements correct. So I'm skipping the nulls. This skips the nulls also. And then the final thing, remember I had talked about before that we might be automatically dynamically generating JSON. Well, another thing we might do is we might dynamically generate variables from JSON. So here I've got, various, an array, a number, an object, and a string as my input JSON, right? And then I've got this custom function keys to vars or keys to vars with reps, right? So if I recall correctly, I need to have the data viewer open, and I think I need to run this with the debugger also. Let's maybe not. Okay, let's see if I need to do both. Run keys to vars script. If your data viewer is active, click OK. It is. And I'm on the current tab. I know that's where I want to be. So I'm going to click OK. And it says, okay, generate variables from the keys of this object and optionally specify a repetition. Okay, why not? Okay, so now I've given a repetition. Your variables should be visible, right? And they are, right? So now I've got a string, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. I can't resize these columns while this OK is here. And if I click OK, the script will be over and these will vanish. But you can see we've got the object, we've got the array, we've got a number, and we've got our string. So that's just what that does. So where do I use that? I use that all the time because I'm passing in, running a subscript, passing the parameter as JSON, and then running keys to vars. And I don't do it very often with repetitions, which is JSON keys to vars with reps, but you could, so if you're doing something complicated and you wanted to have the same var over and over again, but just a different repetition, right? You could do that. So that is the end of my custom function.
I'm really curious on that one because I send JSON to my scripts and evaluate the script parameter to convert the JSON into variables as a standard in all my systems.
Yep.
And I ran into that a while back, the fact that using repetition. So the question is, this is basically because to specify a repetition in FileMaker, you use square brackets, but those square brackets just break the JSON. Is that what you're compensating for? And I'm curious if that's how you've done how you compensate.
Well, I wrote this like 3 years ago. I haven't thought about it much since, but we can take a look. The square brackets are in the name, and JSON doesn't care about your variable, right? So so let's see, JSON keys to vars. With reps. Okay, so yeah, it's a bunch of gibberish. It's a bunch of gobbledygook. But I really don't want to dig into something I wrote a couple years ago and haven't thought about. So
Okay.
It's there. You can pull it apart and see what's happening when you download it, and it's already available on my website. This isn't something you have to wait for me to post. So
What I ended up doing was substituting out the square brackets for a different character, and then evaluating it as a variable. I resubstitute it back to square brackets. But I just wondered if you had done it in a different way than I had, or
yeah,
also.
again, I really don't remember, so I'm not going to take the time to figure it out now. I think,
Okay.
sorry, that just sounds really snotty, but I don't want to waste the group's time.
I
One thing
definitely
I would say,
understand trying to dig through coding that I've done a few years ago and trying to explain it is a little bit difficult on the spot. There was another comment I wanted to bring up also from the chat. Chris Conger mentioned that for the authorized JSON object, we have prefixed the keys with a value, example A underscore B underscore, etc., to sort it in the desired authorized order. And then after the JSON object is created in the proper order, use substitute to get rid of the prefixes. So it was just explaining that a workaround that they had worked for dealing with authorized.net. So
what's funny is you've now pointed out to me that there's a missing article here because I have one on that too, and it uses the same trick. It actually uses two different tricks. I don't know if any of you are familiar with a UK developer named Paul Jansen. He's a very deep thinker about this stuff. And so what I love about Paul is I'll post an article and then he'll post a comment showing how to do it better. So after I stop, being upset that he upstaged me, I'm very grateful. And that was one of them. So I'll add that to here. It says other JSON articles. I'll put the article for where we did that. Because, yeah, it's a real thing. Another place where it comes up is since JSON is basically human readable, sometimes we need to show our clients the JSON. And so in that case, I very much want to show it to them in a way that's going to work with their brain rather than telling them, oh, you have to look down here. Now you have to look up there because it's alphabetical, right? So that's another place. If I'm demoing the JSON for the client, I want to make it as readable to them as possible.
Alex also had a comment that he was talking about passing /r/n is similar in JavaScript, but he was just thinking that the way he's stripping it out could mess it up in FileMaker, and I think that's a concern about a pilcrow in FileMaker is a new thing for Alex. That's something that's kind of
Right.
unique to FileMaker, but FileMaker reads /r and /n, doesn't it? We
I'd have
don't
to
have to
test.
substitute that out for a Pilcrow in order for us to be able to work with it, do we?
I'm not sure. I'd have to play with some specifics. I'm not
Uh,
going to comment on that right now.
my
I
experience
have
off the
tunnel
top of my
vision.
head
I'm
is no
presenting.
that FileMaker recognizes the /r/n and
When
treats
we
that.
do JSON get element on something like that, it's going to bring it back with, with the new line or the return in there,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, that is very seamless. I will point out something that some people don't know about Pilcrows though. If I want to, I got this from John Mark Osborne many years ago. I actually didn't know it. I'd been already doing FileMaker for like 20 years or 15 years before he figured it out, right? If I want to do a and a lot of people will do this, right? And of course, we could just write that as one string, right? But let's assume we have our reasons, like that's a variable, right? And we want to return separate them, right? And of course, that works, right? If it's a single Pilcrow, you don't need the quotes. Okay, it's working just as well. But if it's two or more, you need the quotes. Okay. Just Pilcrow trivia. Well, I'm ready to move into JSON queries. Should we take some sort of break and come back? I don't need to, but what's the general protocol?